Hi you guys, my name is Zoe, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about behaviorism and the ways that a man named John Watson kind of helped discover and shape what we know today as what we know today to be behaviorism. Many individuals have helped shape the world of education. However, one of the most influential educators was John Watson. John Watson was able to make significant contributions to the theories behind behaviorism and classical conditioning. Because of Watson's interest and eagerness in the world of psychology, we as future teachers can better understand the power that comes with behaviorism methods of teaching, as well as understand the effects that classical conditioning can have on our students. Watson was born in 1878 in Greenville, South Carolina. His mother, Emma, lived a very religious and wholesome life. However, his father Pickens did not. His father he had a drinking problem. He participated in extramarital affairs, and eventually in 1891 he left the family to fend for themselves. His father's absence did a number on Watson, actually. He often rebelled against his mother and his teachers, and sometimes even used violence. He was arrested a few times. However, from the help of his teacher, Mr. Gordon Moore, he was able to turn his life around and go on to study at the University of Chicago. During his time at the University of Chicago, he became very interested in the field of psychology, specifically comparative psychology, or the study of animals, just kind of how they behave, why they behave the way they do, that sort of thing. Watson received his doctorate in 1903 and later went on to become an associate professor of psychology at Johns Hopkins University. In 1913, Watson spoke at Columbia University. His lecture was titled "Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It." So at the time, the people in the field of psychology psychology was kind of a new thing at the time. People were really interested in studying human behavior, but they weren't really sure how to do it yet. So when Watson gave his lecture, it kind of opened the doors to this new theory, which we know as behaviorism. It just kind of changed the way that psychologists thought about consciousness and about how studying it works. Watson saw psychology as the study of actions with the ability to control those actions, so this new idea became known as the behaviorist theory. Many criticisms initially arose throughout the field of psychology towards the behaviorist theory. A lot of people thought that it was really radical, there was no real way to study it, and just at the time it was kind of a little bit of a crazy thing to think that human beings could be trained the same way that dogs could be trained, or the same way that horses could be trained. It was just kind of a really new thing, and people weren't really sure how to take it. However, Watson had done his research, and he had proof of what he had discovered. So like I said before, John Watson took a particular interest in the study of animals. While he was at the University of Chicago, he studied a Russian psychologist known as Ivan Pavlov, and his experiments with classical conditioning. So some of you might know the experiment, but it's known as Pavlov's dog experiment, and basically, in short, Pavlov was able to train a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell. So how he did that was he had a dog hooked up to monitors and leashes just to keep him in place, and what would happen is they would ring a bell and the dog would be given food. And they did that a couple of times. I'm not completely sure, the timeline of it, how long it kind of took to condition the dog to do what they were trying to get it to do. But after a while, they would ring the bell, and the dog would begin to salivate without seeing any of the food. And so Watson was really interested in that. He thought, is there a way that I can push this? Is there a way that human beings can be trained kind of the same way? So he conducted this experiment with the help of one of his graduate students, Rosalie Reiner, and they began an experiment most commonly known as the Little Albert experiment. So some of you might know that as well. Basically what they did was they had a 9-month-old infant named Albert, And what they did was they introduced Albert to a number of lone stimuli. And when I say lone stimuli, I mean things that would generally have a reaction. So, for example, they introduced him to a white rat. They introduced him to a monkey. They introduced him to a rabbit, to burning newspaper, and then a series of masks, whether it be, scary masks, sad-looking masks, excited-looking masks, funny masks, just kind of things that we as adults would have a reaction to. However, little Albert was only 9 months old. So what happened was when they brought these things out, there was no reaction. He would maybe look at them, try and touch them, but there was no way to tell that he was, really feeling anything, no way to tell that he was scared, no way to tell that he was excited. He wasn't really reacting to the stimuli. So they brought those out a number of times and just kind of, monitored him, wrote down notes, the usual experiment kind of things that we think about. And eventually, though, what they did was whenever they brought out the white rat, Watson would strike a metal bar with a hammer. And so what that did was it caused a loud sound which startled Albert, and he would begin to cry. And so they did that a couple of times. They went through the stimuli, but every time they came to the white rat, they would strike a metal tube with a hammer, and he'd start crying because, loud sound, startling, it's kind of, whoa, However, after a long time of doing that, again, I'm not sure how long it takes to classically condition someone, but after a long time of doing that, they would bring out the white rat, and Albert would begin to cry immediately without hearing any noise. So when they were doing that, he kind of, he'd start crying. And this was pretty groundbreaking information to know that human beings can be trained, kind of the same way that animals can. That was pretty intense stuff at the time. And so that's kind of what behaviorism is. It's the idea that human beings can be trained to behave a certain way. So today, the ideas and theories behind behaviorism are greatly used throughout classrooms everywhere. While we don't generally, as teachers, don't generally try to classically condition their students, it's not something they're aiming for. It does happen though. How often have we been in a classroom where maybe we behave badly and a teacher takes away recess, or I know for me in elementary school we had these cards, and green was, you're being good, yellow was, it's like a warning, and then red was, you had to talk to your parents or something like that. I'm not completely sure. It was kind of a while ago. But, things like that, they happen, and they actually really do have an effect on the students. And it doesn't always have to be negative. You don't have to always be striking a metal tube with a hammer. A lot of times we see this in a positive way. Maybe you behave well and you get a couple extra minutes of recess, or maybe you are good for a substitute teacher and the class gets a party when the regular teacher gets back. So teachers use these tactics to condition or train their students to behave in a way that is easy for them to manage. So in conclusion, John Watson changed the way that educators educate, essentially. He was able to uncover an interesting behavioral pattern in which human beings operate and live their lives. As future teachers, we need to be aware of the tactics that we may or may not want to use in order to teach our students or run our classrooms. While behaviorism is fascinating, is that a teaching style that we want to take on? Do we want to classically condition or operantly condition our students to behave a certain way? The world of psychology is a really fascinating field, and as future educators, we should have a desire to understand what that field kind of has to offer, because it tells you a lot about how children behave or how human beings behave. And if you know how they behave, it makes it a little bit easier to educate them. And so behaviorism is a really interesting field, and John Watson was able to cultivate that and get that, kind of get that ball rolling for us. And it's just really interesting to me personally. I think that, understanding kind of the theories behind behaviorism can really help a future teacher, us, to be able to understand how to best teach our students. And that's really cool. So thank you guys for listening. I hope that I taught you something new or, something interesting. Have a great day.